You ready?
All right, you guys have 25 seconds, so start making your way back to your seats.
Okay, stand up if you have an Eagles jersey on. All right, we're going to make a count here of the numbers. Let me see. How many have a Wentz jersey on? I can't believe it. Like the guy gets injured and you like all diss him. So 36, that's like Westbrook, right? I saw a couple Westbrooks, yeah. It's good. Kind of retro. That's cool. Go Eagles, eh? Hey, we are not doing that. There you go. I get to wrap up this series on households. When we talk about households, just want to say we're not just talking about people that have mom, dad, children living in the same place. We're really talking about, one, the people you do life with. But even more specifically, we're talking about adults that are investing in the next generation. And so you are very specific that you're doing life with people of the next generation. So this includes teachers that are very intentional about investing in the next generation. This includes uncles and aunts. This includes grandparents. And of course, it includes moms and dads or single moms, single dads that are making a huge investment in the next generation. And we also want to just say a big thank you to all of you that do that. I mean, it's just huge that you are investing in the next generation. I think you will find in eternity that when you look back on your life, you will feel like that's the best thing you ever did was the investment in the next generation. So the theme of this series is that we want to shout something to the next generation, that there's an essential message that we want to make sure that we get across. So many things are shouting at the next generation. So there are certain truths that we want to make sure that get through. Messages like what? If you haven't listened to this sermon series, like when Pastor Greg taught on the four G's, for example, please go online and listen to that. Or if you didn't hear Pastor Chris talk about focusing on the heart, I would say in the history of our church, those are two of the best and most important messages ever given in this church. Can I just say that again? Greg's sermon on the 4 G's and Chris's sermon on focusing on the heart, some of the best and most important messages ever given. They're part of this series. So I'm wrapping that up. So this is the message that we're trying to proclaim to the hearts of the next generation. Things like this, that God is great. He is so great that from situation to situation, I don't really ultimately have to be the one in control. We want to shout that into the lives of the next generation, that God is glorious, that in any given situation, the most influential, the one that we want to care about the most is God. His opinion is what matters most, and how freeing it is to know that God is present in each situation and what he thinks matters most. How freeing that would be for the next generation. That God is gracious. So I don't have to live my life proving myself. That God is glorious. My screen's just got totally turned around here. Have I been saying every one of these wrong? Yo, you flipped my screens. Now see, I got to go back. God is good. I didn't want to miss that one. That means that I can stay within the boundaries of what he gives me. I don't have to go searching elsewhere for good, say God's a loser, so I'm going to go find out good someplace else. That God is great, so I don't have to be in control. I can relax, feeling like Like, it's not that I have to be in charge, things have to go my way. Even when the screens are messed up, I can be totally cool with that. That God is glorious, he's the greatest influence in any given situation, and that God is gracious, and even when you make a mistake, and even when things go wrong, you don't have to prove yourself. Like, those are freeing messages that are essential for the next generation. Like, if you really wanted to get something into the head of your kids or those people that you love, those would be 4 truths that you would want to get in. And the truth is that we are shouting things to the next generation. So, not so much just with your words, but when you influencing, when you joyfully obey God, you're shouting a message to them that God is really good. Then when you don't have to fret when you're not in control, when your kids, when they see a situation that is like things are not in control and you're okay with it because they see in you a reliance in a God who is in control, you are shouting a message into the lives of that next generation. When they see a conflictive situation where someone is snubbing you or someone is treating you poorly and you're okay with it, you don't have to like compromise because you're so afraid of losing the good opinion of somebody. They're learning that for you, the greatest influence is your glorious God. You're shouting a message. And when they see that you don't have to prove yourself or compete or win every argument, when you're okay, you don't have to perform or be perfect or always be like going up the ladder of success or keeping up with the Joneses or the Hernandez or, You're shouting a message to the next generation. And it's freeing. What we're saying is it's essential. It's the essential message that we want to get across to the next generation. So again, thank you for those of you that are doing that. And we want to get that message across to the hearts of the next generation. But I'm sure that those of you that have kind of walked this out a little bit, it's one thing to talk about those things here in this room. It's one thing to have it on a faith talk. It's one thing to, on the car ride home, say, what were the 4 G's? What did Pastor Greg talk about? It's one thing to talk about it. Listen to me. It's another thing for those truths to become, the culture of your home. Now, I just lost some of you there because you say, what are you talking about? The culture of our home. That's what we want to talk about today. What would it look like for these essential truths not to be something that we just talk about, but they become the culture of our household? To do that, let me show you this same passage, Deuteronomy 6, because we've looked at Deuteronomy 6 every week, but did you know that Deuteronomy 6 is a passage about the culture of your home? By the end of this, I think you'll understand what I'm saying. Let me read it for you. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. As I read this, I want you to look for 2 things, because there's 2 things going on concurrently. You know what concurrent means? Same time, okay? 2 things going on at the same time. On one hand, you've got basically they're just doing life. And at the same time that they're doing life, something else is happening. You're going to find out that culture is the something else that is happening while you're doing life. Culture is the something else that's happening while you're doing life. See if you can pick that up here. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Do you see the 2 things going on? The first thing is that they're just doing life. They're hanging out at home. They're just sitting around. They're just doing life. They're they're leaving their house and they're going to work or they're going to school, or they come to the end of their day and they're resting, or they're going to bed, or they're getting up and they're eating breakfast, or they're getting dressed, they're putting things on like their watch, they're putting things on, or they're decorating their home. You see, they're just doing life. But do you notice what's interwoven while they're doing life? They're doing something else. What's the repeated phrase while they're doing life? What are they doing? They're talking about God. While they're doing life, they're doing something else. They're talking about God. What you do while you're doing something else is the culture of your home. So while you're cooking, what are you doing while you're cooking? Well, we're complaining and that's the culture of your home. Or when you're getting ready to go out the door, to go to work or to go to school, what are you doing while you're doing that? Well, we're screaming at the kids. Bam, that's the culture of your home. You see, the culture of your home is what you do while you're doing anything else. It's the way that you do the things that you do. I've used a couple negative examples, but the culture of your home could be something very positive. You know, it could be, well, like while we're doing the things that we do, we're also being very kind to each other, or we're being very thoughtful to each other, or we're being very considerate of each other. Then that would mean the household culture is a kind, thoughtful, considerate culture. But if it's, excuse my language, if it's a pissy culture, if it's a mean, nasty culture, it will show in the way you do the things you do. Does that make sense to everybody? Amen. Culture is what happens while you're doing something else. That's what Deuteronomy 6 is saying. And so what Deuteronomy 6 is saying is, we must be diligent to make sure that the culture of our home is a God culture. So that while we're doing the things that we do, it's infused with God. So in Deuteronomy 6, it says we're talking about God all the time. We're getting up, we're talking about God. We walk home, we're talking about God. But please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's a little God button over here and it's somebody in the family like, oh, this is our time to talk about God. Oh, isn't God good? Done talking about God like we did that's not your culture. Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some level of intentionality in this, but the culture of your home isn't really work like that. It's not like, okay, this is now our God time, and so now we've got to do the God thing because God people do the God thing at this certain time, so we're in the car, so we got to talk about God because Deuteronomy 6 says we talk. No! The next generation sees right through that. It's more when there's something about God that spills out of you. That's the culture of your home. It's almost that the talk about God is talk without words, so that they see you obey joyfully and they know that God is good, not because you've said 100 times God's good, but because they see you obey joyfully. And they see you in conflictive situations where the influence of someone could overshadow you, and you're not intimidated by that outside influence, and you see God as biggest, and the message is, oh, God is glorious, and without words, you're shouting to them through the culture of your life, the glory, the bigness, the influence of God. It just comes out of you. Does that make sense? It's significant, friends. Because you know what? Culture always wins. Always. What we talk about in this room always gets trumped by culture. Always. Your pastor can shout up here and yell and scream and do everything he can to try to get the point across. But what they see in the life of the adults in their life always has the greater influence on the mindset of the next generation. Always. Unless you get to live closely in my household, and then you get to see if it's actual and if it's real. So what Greg talked about is an important message. The 4 Gs, I just think is huge. I just think it's huge. What Pastor Chris talked about, the focus on the heart, I just think it's huge. I say two of the best messages I've ever heard preached in this church. I think this sermon's more important. Not because I'm preaching it, but because culture always trumps content every time. So today we want to talk a little bit about culture. I'm going to invite my wife to come on up because every time Sharon talks, people like it. Come on up, Sharon. I tell her all the time people like to be around her. She says, "Oh, stop, Nate. You know, they really like to be around you." Oh, my goodness. I gave you a handout, and actually we have some extras. So it's in your bulletin, and you're going to take some notes. It's got 5 things of 5 cultures, and I'll explain these as we go through. So Charlie has just volunteered to hand those out, and Jed as well. So if you don't have a bulletin and you'll want these things, so as Sharon talks, you can take some notes. So let me say a couple disclaimers about these things. Number 1, we've got 5 listed here, but they are in no way the sum total of the cultural dynamics of a home, okay? Right? Caleb, family ministries coordinator, you'd probably have some other stuff, right? These are great. Last week, actually, Caleb talked about this. I am so thankful for our family ministry coordinator. It was awesome what he said in those 5 minutes last week. But he was talking about the same thing. So in other words, these 5 are not the sum total of the kinds of cultural things that you would want to focus on. Second thing, you will notice, even by looking at them at a quick glance, none of them are necessarily very spiritual. Right? You look at the list. None of them are like, oh, I can see a Bible verse for that. Okay? Think of these 5 things more as the pulse of your household. This is the heartbeat this is the blood pressure of your household. This is the way for you to measure the health of your household. And if your household is healthy, then probably the truth of God will be able to be well communicated in a healthy household. If your household doesn't have a healthy culture, probably there's so much static in your household that the message of God is not going to penetrate the heart of the next generation. Man, I just said a mouthful. I hope it got through. Did you hear me? If the culture is unhealthy, the message won't penetrate. Okay? And the other thing I'd say about these 5 things is, as you will see by the end, the truth of God, though, will ultimately shape those cultural things. So even now you can start to look like, how would, for example, an understanding of the 4 Gs, like God is in control, result in that kind of culture? Wouldn't a house be a fun house if we knew that God was in control? Wouldn't there be less anxiety, less freaking out, less worry if we knew that God really? And so it goes throughout the list. So they are interrelated, but they're not specific, like a 1-to-1 correlation. Okay, so here we go. Number 1, let's have fun is what I would say is a cultural, like that'd be the culture of your home. Actually, it was that was the first one that you brought last week, right, Capes? Yeah, let's have fun. Sharon, explain that. What do we mean by let's have fun?
Well, let me tell you a story. Well, I always grew up wanting our sons to love God. And I usually thought to do that, you get out your Bible and you have a talk about God. And that's part of it. But there's also another part of the atmosphere. So the story that came to mind about fun in our home was me looking out the dining room window where we used to live, and Nate and the 3 guys are playing basketball. Then I see them get the hose out and squirt each other, so they're like from head to toe wet, and then they're laying on the grass, and they're talking. So I'm in the house, the mom, he's out with the 3 sons.
Saying, why aren't we reading the Bible more?
Nate comes
That
in and
husband
says,
of mine.
we just had this
Why don't we
really
read the Bible
beautiful
more?
talk. And over and over, I saw where things that were in his heart did get to get shared with our sons, but a lot of times it was in the middle of playing games, having conversations, competitions, maybe music. They would all have their instruments out, be jamming for a while, and then topics would come up. So it's just the idea of getting into the kids' world, what they like, interests, things that are fun for them, and making that connection.
The way I like to think about it is imagine a circle here. This is my son, or that, it's that student in your school, or whoever you're focusing on as like the next generation. This is their world. It's what they're interested in, what they love, what they want to be part of. And this is your world. And you'll notice right away, you're not in it. Typically, that's the case. So this is your world. This is their world. Often in our parenting, this is what we do. You get over here. I have some things I want to talk to you about. That's why they come over like this. When can we be done talking? Because you're demanding that they come into your world. This is, I want to come into your world. So we find our way into their world in any way. This is not the sum total of what you're doing to invest in the next generation. It is essential that they know that you're speaking into their world. So when I would play basketball with my kids, do I like to play basketball? Yes, I like to play basketball. Is that why I did it? No, because the truth is I don't play basketball anymore. And it's not just because I'm old. It's because my sons aren't playing basketball anymore. If my sons asked me to play basketball this afternoon, guess where I'd be? I'd play basketball because I want to be in their world. I want to be in their world. So here was my thought is, when I go into their world, guess what I'm taking into their world? I'm taking me into their world. And if God's on my life, guess who's going into their world? Number 2. Can I start this one? This is one of my favorites. It kind of goes along with that.
You're more animated second service.
That's because I pour out all my energy here because I know I can go home and have a rest. All right, so I do this still to this day. This to me is huge. Like, if I'm going to be in their world, it starts with their eyes. So greeting people is huge. If you ever watch me, if my granddaughters come up to me, it just happened to me in the copy room, if my granddaughters come up to me, where do I go? It's the first thing I do. You've all seen it. I do not ever want them to look up to see my eyes. I want them to know that I'm at their level to see their eyes. There's something huge about let's look at each other's eyes. That's a culture of a home. For example, go to a restaurant, do a little study, go to a restaurant and do a little survey of all the tables that make up households in that restaurant and look at everybody's eyes and how often in those little tables the eyes are meeting. It's often very sad. Talk.
I substitute in the public schools a couple days a week. So I'm practicing this, and I've learned it from other teachers. But when the kids line up, if I'm the Spanish teacher for the day, they line up, and in come my class of kids. And I've tried to practice looking at each child's eyes. Something happens when either they're just a big mob of kids, or when you look at their eyes and you say good morning or come on in or whatever, something happens when someone's caring about you and paying attention to you. So there's something of working to have that in your culture where you're not just running by each other, where the TV's not on all the time, where the phones aren't on all the time, you're distracted.
We have dinner together.
Yeah, where you're actually sitting down and looking at each other's eyes, setting other things aside. It speaks a lot to what you think their value is, and obviously what God thinks of their value.
So transitions like greeting. When someone walks in a room, does everything stop so that when that person walks in the room, we greet the person that just walked in the room? Not like when they went to the bathroom and they came back, but like if they were at school and they walk into the house, do we recognize, acknowledge that they've been gone and now they're back? Or when they're going away, do we actually say goodbye? That's all in this as well, yeah.
One time Nate was on a 7-week tour when we were missionaries. So I was a mom, kind of like a single mom for 3 sons. So because I valued looking in their eyes and being with them, every night I would take a half hour with each one of them. So they knew at night I was going to be with them to just listen to them, talk to them, some like that individual care of you're important.
One of my sons, actually, something in our church, I shared this at the Milestone Breakout last week, but one of my sons, it was very difficult for him to allow us really into his world. So, we can step into his space, but a lot of you know this, often for a child to open up their heart and allow someone in is a very vulnerable thing. And they stay in control simply by saying, I don't want to talk about it, right? It's just very safe just to say, I don't want to talk about it, don't want to talk about it, don't want to talk about it. I remember my son saying to me often, do we have to talk about it? So you try to get in, and there's these secret ways into the heart of a child. So I would remember laying in bed with my son, of course, in a very safe way, but just laying there for an extended period of time, sometimes 20, 25 minutes, where he would not talk. He was comfortable in my presence, I guess, but we would just be silent. And then all of a sudden, it was like the lid came off. And somebody just came up to me this morning that I had shared this with last week, and he said, same thing happened with my son. All of a sudden, he just started to talk. So that's the being in their world, looking in their eyes.
Imagine, in our culture, we're just so busy and so distracted and so not looking at eyes. So that's like a really big treasure you can give a child, to know that God thinks of them and has his eyes on them.
Now look at the balance of this, okay? You can imagine how sick it would be if everything in your household was, oh, you. Look at the balance here. Let's think about others outside our household. Let's get them outside of themselves. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think we just tried to look for ways where our family wasn't just focused on us. So I remember we lived in New York City on a 218th Street in Queens. And across the street was a single mom. She lived with her boyfriend and had 2 little kids. So we started having friendship with them, and we would have them over and to talk about God, get to know them, and we would help our kids make up little games and plan like what their kids could do while we were talking with the adults. So it was like something our whole family was working on, and it was helping train them to think of other people. And I think our 3 sons grew up in this church, and we sacrificed a lot of summertime allowing them to be part of summer ministry, because a big part of getting a heart for other people is being in the community and knowing other people. So I think those were big formative years for letting them get their heart thinking of other people. It also works with grandkids. Or, if you wake up in the morning and give your kid, what would you like to do? What would you like to do? Now, what would you like to do? I think they get less and less happy. When I see a kid pouty and then I think they need to think about somebody else. So helping them think of who they could serve, or even set the table or do work, or basically be thinking outside of just what they want.
Yeah, so we have a couple things that are very unhealthy in our culture. I'm talking American culture, and within evangelical or Christian culture, and it's within LFA culture as well, okay? And so one of those things is that we have a very high commitment to the development of our children, very high commitment to the development of our children, but we're developing in them ways that make them self-focused. Okay, let me contrast that. So we look at what are their talents, how can I develop that talent? What are their interests, how can I develop? So it's all pouring into the child with their talents and their interests, and the end apparently seems to be the development of them, as if the story of their life is ultimately about them. That's a big problem. What if you just tweaked it a little bit and you looked at God's design on their life through that talent, where the end is not them, but something bigger than themselves? And we were very intentional about helping our children learn that their gifts, talents, desires are part of God's design for a bigger story than themselves. When we moved to New York City, one of the selling points to our family is that I told my son Joel, guess what, Joel? They have a homeless ministry in this church. He said, really? Big heart of compassion in my son Joel. Still to this day, huge pastoral heart of compassion. We tapped into that as a 8-year-old boy, and said, Joel, they have a homeless ministry. Could I ever be part of that? He's learning that the story of his life is not about himself, but about serving others. So Saturday after Saturday, guess where Joel was at 8 o'clock in the morning? And someone had to get out of bed on Saturday morning to take him. But Sharon gets up early anyway, so she didn't mind.
Always thinking about other people.
Always thinking about others. But you get the idea? There's this great book by Donald Miller, and there's this story in the book where this family was absolutely dysfunctional, broken apart. And the dad, to help his family, came to the conclusion that his daughter needed a story bigger than herself. And he eventually cast vision to his daughter that they were going to fund an orphanage in another country. And at first she was like, are you out of your mind? And he said, yes. And it was life transforming for her to find that there was gifts and resources on her life where the end of it was not her. There's so much in that cultural thing. So it's not just fun, eyes on you. It's, hey, there's a much bigger story. Your life is worth so much more. I think Caleb used the word epic. We invite them into an epic story. Next.
A big one for our household, for different reasons. I think Nate would say he grew up where there was a lot of teasing and making fun and hard kind of atmosphere with the words.
I'm doing this one there.
Yeah. Oh, love each other. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Never mind.
They switched our screens. Sorry.
I thought I read it upside.
I'm sorry.
My story for this one is, as leaders, you can create atmosphere in the kids you're leading, whether it's at school, if you're subbing, or in your household, of atmosphere like we're in process. We're not perfect. Like it's okay to be in process. So we have fun stories of Nate learning his process of learning to be gentle, because that wasn't the way he grew up. As a family, we're all trying to help him, and he told our sons, you can pay me, I'll pay you 25 cents if you catch me raising my voice. So it kind of made this game in our family of watch out, if he raises his voice, we're going to get 25 cents. So Caleb made a sign one time on his office door because he had raised his voice. So when he came out, he found a sign that said, Dad, you owe me 25 cents.
So I yelled at him.
But I've been trying to do this. As I sub in the classrooms. If I'm a gym teacher, I can give them a little talk like, we're going to run laps now. And the idea is not to be the best, not to try to, put other people down. The idea is you run the best you can. Or speaking Spanish. Some kids do speak Spanish, so they're going to do it better. Like, give them we're in process. This is okay. You don't have to be perfect, and we're not trying to be the one who always wins kind of atmosphere.
It's so freeing because there is, on the human in the human psyche or in the human nature, there's this thing of if I sin, I'll be punished. All of us, it's just part of us. It's inside of us. That fear has to do with punishment, the Bible says. So in any household, when someone has failed in any way, you're pretty sure you're going to get hit. So imagine the freedom from shame and hiding, which is very destructive for a household. When freedom comes, when we can say, we can talk about that failure. And typically to do that, we have to lead. Like as mom and dad, we have to be the ones to show the way. Last one. This is the one you were going to start on.
So I was saying how important this was to us because of maybe how we grew up in our families. But our family memorized, if you look at Ephesians 4, there's a verse in there that says, let no corrupt or unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only words that will build each other up. That is such I have such a passion for that. Whatever little circle of kids I'm leading or people I'm with, because I feel like words are so powerful. And so to be able to know in our household, we're going to only have words or practice only having words that are going to be helpful for building others up. And when I have a group of kids at a school or whatever, I tell the class, I'm here only just for a little bit. I'm your substitute. But I'm going to make sure in this room we don't use our words to hurt each other. In other words, we only use words that will build each other up. So that's a big one for me.
I think that's it. So I hope you can see, like this one here, that's definitely related to the 4 Gs, right? That God is gracious. God's gracious. So when I don't even meet my own standards, or when we have a culture of kind words, and yet the dad is the one that is the loudest and the meanest sometimes, like we lean into the grace of God and we talk about it. So these things become both informed by the truth about God, but then proclaim the truth of God as we focus on this culture. Any last words, Sharon?
Just when I was thinking about this, why we would be so intentional on the culture of our home, we love Jesus a lot. We know that relationship with Jesus is what we want for the next generation. So in order for that to happen, we've got to fight for the atmosphere. So we've got to fight that we will use kind words or we will be in process or so you're fighting for something, and it kind of seems like, we're fighting to have fun in our family, but it's with a deeper purpose. Mm-hmm. We're going to create an atmosphere where there'll be open door to share our relationship with Jesus with them.
Thank you, Cher. Okay, so let's have the worship team come up and the people that are going to serve us communion come on up. We have lots of time, thank the Lord. And so we're going to use this time to have some conversations in our households, okay? Or with some friends. If your household's not here, find some people that you can have a conversation with. We would like you to especially focus on the second one, really just the first part of the second one, of what is one of these cultural aspects that you would like to draw some attention to for your household? Just one. And then pray about that. That's what we'd like you to do. So talk together and say, of these 5, what's one that we're kind of feeling like this could use some shoring up. This could use some attention in our household. 1, okay? And then pray about it. As you do it, I want you to lean into the grace of God. Years ago, whenever we would have any kind of conversation as a church about the next generation, there was one lady. She left our church years ago, but she would come up to me so angry at the end of every time I would teach. And she would say, I am so angry. And I'd say, tell me. She'd say, you make me feel terrible. And I'd say, I'm sorry, that's not my intent. I don't want you to feel terrible. Why do you feel terrible? It's because every time I think about being a parent, all I can think about is my failure. So we would have a conversation about the grace of God. Do you know that God's grace is so big, that he even takes the sins done against us or the sins that we have committed, and somehow in his wisdom weaves those together into a beautiful tapestry. Welcome, kids. We love it when you walk in here. Come on in. God weaves such brokenness. God weaves such brokenness into this beautiful tapestry, this beautiful cloth that's a demonstration of his glory. And with time we see there was even good in that for me and for others. And he got glory somehow through something that was so dark. You're saying, Nate, you're making that up. No, I'm not. That is the story throughout all of God's revealed word. So for you, as we take communion, lean into the grace of God. You'll need it, because the truth is, if you don't, listen to me. If you don't lean into the grace of God, you'll quit. You'll find a way to opt out, and you'll just survive. God has so much more for you than that. So I'm going to pray for us in a moment. Let me give you some family training here on taking communion. You'll see there's 4 stations. We're not going to put any charts up on the screen. I don't know about you, but last month when they put the chart on the screen, I almost had a panic attack. It just looked so, whoa. I need to take a picture and study that for about 3 weeks before I could understand it. So you'll notice that there's someone standing in front of every section of chairs, so you can probably do the math, right? So that's the person you're gonna go to, okay? And let me show you the pathway of how you're gonna get there. So you're gonna use this aisle. So you guys are gonna come this way and you guys are gonna come this way. If you really wanna be like high tech, you can make 2 rows if you want. But don't flip-flop, because then you're gonna get really messed up. So you guys go this way, you guys go this way. And just to repeat it over here, so, there's 2 sections. You guys are gonna come this way, you guys are gonna come, this is the row that you're gonna use to get here. To return to your chairs, you don't use the same row. You guys come this way, back to your chairs. So think cool circle, right? And you guys go to the outside. You guys go to the outside, okay? Otherwise, we're gonna have to call 911. We're gonna have an accident someplace in the middle, and a fist fight in the middle of communion just would not go well at church, so. Yeah. Okay, communion. If you've prepared your children for this, do this as a household. Do this together. If you haven't ever prepared your children, your children have never taken communion, you don't have time to prepare them now. So get some material. We have it out in the back. Go to our webpage. We're not quite ready, John. Just hold on there just a second. And prepare them for next time. Here's how I want you to think of communion. Yes, thank you. There's a gluten-free station in the back. Thank you. Some of you physically need the gluten-free. It's in the back. You can go any way you want to get to the gluten-free station. Okay, you ready? So here's how I want you to walk through communion. Communion is this: Jesus gives, we receive. Communion is for us as Christians what a wedding ring is for a married couple. It's a covenant symbol. A wedding ring reminds me I'm married. It's a symbol to all. I'm married. Communion is my symbol. I'm aligned with Jesus Christ, and in this relationship, it works this way. He gives, I receive. He gives, I receive. He pays, I receive. So his body broken for my sin. His blood poured out for my forgiveness. He gives, I receive. So friends, lean deeply into the grace of God. If you've claimed Christ as your Savior, He's your King, we invite you to take communion with us today. So Lord Jesus, come and be present with us now. So much more than just a symbol, so much more than just a memory. It's a moment in your presence, so come and be present with us here. Amen.